Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Blessings podcast. Today, I have with me the beautiful C. She is known as the Healable on her social media, and she is a trauma-informed yoga and art therapy practitioner. She combines body movement and art therapy, and I think it's really cool because it's nonverbal and somatic. So it really lets you get into the whole process of healing in a very different way than we're used to. I love that. She has a focus on healing the inner child and releasing all the things that get stored in the body through the life experiences, which I'm very interested in. It's a focus of mine as well. C is originally from Hong Kong, and she now lives in Europe with her husband. And she uses the creative elements also of aromatherapy and somatic healing, which I love. I was looking at some sound bowls the other day. I thought they were so beautiful. I'd love to learn how to use those myself. She also uses meditation in her therapy. She's highly compassionate. And what I know about C personally is that she's very sensitive to energies, and you seem very empathic, C. And so I'm really interested to hear about how you use those additional sensory abilities that you seem to have in your work as well. C is just someone who wants to make a strong impact on the world. I think everyone she meets professionally and personally can feel that about her, and she's on a journey to help as many people as she can. So this is the beautiful C.
This is the most beautiful introduction I've heard someone to introducing me. So thank you, Missy. Thank you for
Oh,
having me. And I'm so blessed to be here as well.
thank you. I'm so glad to have you. Yeah, this is going to start my day off with some really, really beautiful vibes. So
Yeah.
let's get into it. I know that you are originally from Hong Kong. So we're just going to go
Mhm.
right away back to the beginning of your life. And maybe you can tell us about where you were born and a little bit about your family in the very early time when you were born in Hong Kong.
Yeah, sure. So, a bit of a story of how my family was formed as well. My dad was from Hong Kong and my mom was from Shanghai, so from China. Since they met, they have decided to stay in Hong Kong. So, my mom got pregnant in Hong Kong, but most of her pregnancy, she raised me in Thailand because she really loved Thailand and she loved traveling. That is a big part in her life that means a lot for her. I was a bit of an unexpected surprise for them when they knew that they were pregnant because my dad was 54 years old that time, 53 years old, that's 52. Yeah, I'm really bad in maths. So around early 50s already. They didn't expect that a miracle would happen for them. After that, when my mom born me, then she decided to stay in Hong Kong, but at the same time, my family from Shanghai, they came down to help her and visit her as well. So a bit of an interesting part, I think, for my like early babyhood was that I was raised in an environment full of different languages because my dad speaks Cantonese, my mom speaks Mandarin, and my grands they only speak Shanghainese. So I was growing up in this environment full of people speaking different languages, and I think that also helped me in observing people. Because when I was absorbing the language, maybe I didn't really understand it at the beginning, but seeing their facial expression, their nonverbal communication, I'm guessing what are they talking about and stuff. And that is how
Oh,
I was born. And after I was born in my early childhood, I was actually raised by my grands in Shanghai. And then I was moving back to Hong Kong to study when I was 5, 6 years old.
okay. So you started when you were born, you were in Hong Kong for a bit. Then you went back to China and lived there for a while, and then came
Yeah.
back to Hong Kong when you were 5. So
Mhm.
I think that's really interesting what you said about the nonverbal communication. Maybe that's why that's so important in your work.
Yeah, definitely. And when I was a baby that time, because my cousins, they were only raised by single language. So mainly they were being raised by Mandarin and speaking Shanghainese with my grand. but I also need to communicate with my dad in Cantonese. So I didn't understand each language completely well when I was a toddler. So I was communicating a lot about myself in nonverbal way as well. So it's interesting when I see some videos my mom showed me when I was a kid. Normally kids will learn one word, they mean that they are hungry. But because I couldn't really differentiate whether I'm speaking which language, so I was always adding my hands or using my body to try to let people understand how I was feeling.
That is so interesting. Do you think that that enhanced your ability to communicate with people?
Yeah, I think that is very relating to how you described me. I also really feel that I can be really sensitive to people's movement or people's facial expression and stuff. I think that was something I picked up since my childhood, which I didn't even notice it before as well.
I love the nuance of language development, and your
Mhm.
example is very interesting. It's so unique because you think about kids who are born into bilingual households, and you were
Mhm.
trilingual and had little bits and pieces of everything. But could those people in your family communicate with one another?
Yeah, they can. So with my grands, it's a little bit harder for my dad to communicate with them. But because my mom also speaks Mandarin and Shanghainese, so she would be kind of the translator between them. But apart from that, everyone in my family, they can also communicate with each other. And so I think for adults, when they pick up some specific words, it's easier for them to communicate as well.
And it sounds like your family all had a part in raising you.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
you were
definitely.
in an extended family atmosphere. So who were the people that were your village, your team of people raising you as a young child?
So it's really interesting. Before I was one, I was surrounded with a lot of people. My mom, my dad, and then my grand, they were all around me. Then my dad's health went a little bit downside. So my mom was in Hong Kong and looking after him and working as well. So I was just going back to Shanghai with my grands. But at the same time, that my older cousin, his parents were working in Japan. He was being raised with me together by my grands and our nanny. So it seems we form a micro family with that. I would call my older cousin as brother rather than a cousin because it was such a strong bond when I was
Yeah.
a kid, and we're both really young and being raised by the same people together.
That gives you an opportunity for a lot of people to love you from an early
Hmm.
age. It's really a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. It's definitely, I think, a cultural difference than a traditional family in the United States would be just mom and dad. If the parents were working, they would go to daycare typically. And some lucky kids do have the extended family there, but I feel like your situation is a lot more of the norm. That was something people did, was have their village of people, their family of people.
Yeah, I do agree that it's a culture different as well because I know a lot of my friends or nowadays kids in Hong Kong, they were also like raised by grands because their dad and mom needs to go to work and daycare might be not as affordable or easy to reach for them,
Mm.
especially during the COVID time when everything is being closed, but the parents still needed to go to work. So the part of how grants play in the child's childhood become a big part as well.
Yeah, I love that. I had very involved grandparents when I was little as well, and we lived
Mhm.
very close to them, so they did take care of me a lot when I was a little girl. I did not go to daycare, so I had a similar situation, but not as close as yours. So what is the first thing that you remember in your actual memory? You've told stories about what you know about it, but what's the first actual memory you have in your life?
That is something really interesting for me that it took me a long time to figure it out as well, because I kept having a feeling that I lost a lot of memories when I was a kid. I didn't really remember of my whole childhood, how I was being raised, where and stuff, until I was looking back on the pictures or talking with my family. Then it's those small puzzles coming back to my mind that, oh, I think I remember that day that something happened. But all my memories became really, how do I describe it? Very blurred. I feel like I see something there, but at the same time, I don't. I
Oh,
won't say I have very clear memories before I was 10 years old, which when I was a teenager, that time I felt really weird because that was quite an old age for not remembering the things happening before that. But then when I start to do my own healing work and start to go to therapy, I realized that that actually makes sense. So I would say my first memories that is really clear in my head was the day when my grandpa passed away, because it was really strange. So my grandpa passed away when I was 13, and my granny passed away when I was 10, and my dad passed away when I was 6. So I didn't have
oh,
any memories of those times. But only when my grandpa passed away that day, I remember I had a really bad nightmare, and it's about him. The first thing I woke up and telling my mom was, you need to phone him. That is really important. You need to do that. But my mom was just, yeah, we will do that after you came back from school and stuff. And so I just pick up my things and went to school. And that was a day that it hadn't been raining for a very long time. And that day it rained. And I didn't like raining. So I was, okay, it's a bad sign. The moment I entered school, the teacher came to me to say, oh, your mom is coming to pick you up because she just received a phone call that your grand has passed away. Then I was having this feeling that it was such a deep connection between me and my grand that I could feel that he came back to me before he passing away. That was a very valid memory I have. I still can remember what I wrote that day, who the teacher talked to me and stuff. From that on, I would say my memory starts to form in my head. But it's really interesting. Before that, I would say I only remember some broken pieces, but not the memory.
wow. There's so much there. Just to clarify, you were
Mhm.
10 years old when your grandfather passed
I
away?
was 12, 13. So
12 or 13. Okay. I'm very struck by the idea that your teacher told you that he had passed away.
mhm.
How did you feel about that? That it was her telling you this?
I felt she is a teacher that I really trust, and she's someone that cares for me and stuff at school as well. So I didn't really have a strong feeling of, oh, it's not my family telling
Mm,
me that. But I think my head went really blank at that time. I didn't know how I should react. My mom is a single mom, and she didn't really handle emotion very well. I think at that moment, more in my head was, how should I react when my mom came to pick me up? Should I be that strong girl that to comfort her instead of showing my emotion? Or should I be showing my actual emotion that I was really sad? My grand had a stroke since I was born. So his health situation wasn't something we didn't expect he would be passing away. We kind of had a long time in our mentally to be prepared by that. But still, I was really shocked about how much his death has impacted me as well. It just brought back all the memories whenever I'm thinking of him. And since he didn't really have a lot of verbal communication as well. Oh, that's interesting. We're coming back to the topic of
Yes.
verbal communication.
Look at this.
So, yeah, it's true. I was the only grandchild that would communicate with him non-verbally. Sometimes I want to make him laugh, and I would be like, stealing his biscuit from his biscuit jar, and I would see he would be laughing, he would be smiling, and so we were communicate in a lot of ways that became our own language together, and
Mm,
so those memories is something when I grow up, I realized, oh, that's interesting
mhm.
how they shaped me as well.
You had a special bond with your grandfather because I presume he was not able to speak because he had had a stroke.
Yeah.
Oh, that is really fascinating. And you actually had a premonition about him, and you feel that was him coming to you and letting you know that it was his time?
Yeah, and I was really surprised that that was him because I definitely consider myself having a stronger bond with my grandmother because she was the one who mainly raising us up. Whenever I went back to Shanghai to visit, I would be sleeping with her. So there was a long time I was feeling angry that she didn't tell me she was going to pass away. And I think that anger was also coming from the denial of me of that grief with her. But when my grand passed away that time, I didn't really have a lot of negative emotion towards it, but more it's the treasure between the things happened between us, and it's an interesting comparison
It
when I think
is.
of how did that impacted me.
You had a lot of loss as a child.
Yeah, I think that was why when I start talking with my therapist, it makes sense for my memory loss. And that became the reasons I started my healing work as well, because
Mm,
I do want to connect myself back with the past memories that I had. Because I used to picture my childhood as instead of a puzzle that, oh, I can form the piece from piece to piece. But it seems my memories are just going inside one place together, and I couldn't pick up, oh, this is that time happened, or oh, the memories were just really messed up, and
mhm,
I felt the need of, oh, I want to be more structured with knowing myself.
mhm.
Mhm.
When you were 5 years old, you were living in Hong Kong with both of your parents going to school.
That part was something is another story as well,
Okay.
because my mom decided to bring me back to Hong Kong when I was 5, almost the time when I need to go to primary school. She decided that the education in Hong Kong would be better for me and it would be a better environment for me to grow. She brought me back from Shanghai to Hong Kong, and she had been telling me that my dad was just working far away and he was someone that we couldn't reach. And I accepted the fact that, oh, I won't be there with my dad together. But I always had been having the thought that my dad was working somewhere and he will be back one day. And
Mm,
until I was 9 years old, then one day my mom told me that actually my dad passed away 3 years ago. And then I started to know that, oh, I actually don't have a dad figure in my life anymore. But I don't really have a lot of memories about my dad because since I was 3, we never met each other. He was
mm,
in and out hospital and I was in Shanghai all the time. So we didn't really have that memory together unless I see it on pictures that when the time we were in Hong Kong together.
okay. So your dad was sick. He was ill when you were a little
Hmm.
girl.
Yeah.
Then when you went back to Hong Kong, you lived with your mom and he wasn't there. You don't really know
Hmm.
where he was. He was not in a hospital or something. He was sick.
Yeah, I think that's that time he was in hospital. But this is something my mom still doesn't really want to talk about a lot about my dad. I couldn't really figure out the whole story
Mm.
with what happened to him, why we weren't meeting, or why I wasn't in his funeral, or I didn't even know where he is being buried now. Those become some sensitive topics that my family doesn't want to talk about. Every time my mom would just try to move topics very quickly. So that became something is still a mystery in my head.
Wow, that's hard when you have that kind of a mystery to deal with. I can relate to that as well. I never had maternal grandparents growing up, and I knew that they had died, but my mom never told me how they died or when they died. I knew that she had been
Mhm,
orphaned as a little girl, but I didn't know how they died. And I spent my whole childhood making up stories about how they died. I didn't know how.
mhm,
And I came up with some pretty horrible scenarios that haunted
mhm,
me, that caused a lot of fear for me as a child.
mhm.
And I wonder if you did the same thing. Do you feel you made up stories in your own mind?
Yeah, definitely. Before I knew that my dad passed away, I kept making up stories too. Because when in our education, I believe that wasn't that trauma informed. So every kid needs to write a story about my mom or my dad. But
Um,
I knew nothing about my dad. So we keep coming up with stories that, oh, he's working in America. So he was a firefighter. So he couldn't come back to us and be next to me. But those stories are mainly formed by I watched something on TV or by my friend's story. And I remember there was this story I shared on night when I was keep making up this story, and how it got exposed was my mom in on a parents' day and in front of the whole class, and she was just saying to everyone, "No, his dad isn't a firefighter in America." So that moment, I
mm,
felt the embarrassment of being caught as a liar. At the same time, there was this confused me that I didn't know what to tell people about my dad, and I still didn't know that time. That formed a lot of confusions in my childhood. And same as you, I have always have questions about, so how about my father's mother and father? I have never met them. Why they didn't want to meet me? So there was this lost part in me that I felt hard to connect to.
yeah, the lost part of you. For me, when my mother passed away, I was able to do some detective work and find my relatives in England. My mom was English, and I also found out about her parents and how they did pass away. And so I got some answers. I can't
Mhm.
imagine, how do you deal with not having the answers? What kinds of things do you do to help?
I think that part is something I won't say I'm completely healed. I would say I'm still healing with my relationship with my mom. There is this anger part of me feeling why she cannot talk about these things with me. And actually, I don't even care about what maybe the bad result or it's something I wasn't mentally mature enough to handle when I was 20, 22, 23 years old that time. I expected we could have an adult conversation to talk about these things, but she still wasn't ready to talk about it. That part of me was still very confused with what happened in the bag. But there is also this relieved part of me since I start my healing work. The answers might not be as important as I thought it could be, because no matter what kind of result I found out, I couldn't really change the path that happened that time. And at the same time, I don't think it would affect my current life a lot anymore. And so that part of me, I feel I got a bit more. mm, Before, I felt I was on a boat and it was on a very wavy ocean. But right now, I would say I'm still feeling I'm on this boat in the middle of the sea, but the sea is calm and I'm able to look around and see which direction I would want to go to, whether I would want to keep finding out so what happened to my dad, or I just would want to go back to the shore and be comfortable with the current information that I know about. And so I feel that part of me was more in control, more in my own choice.
It's really about identity as well, isn't it?
Mhm. Yeah.
And you get to decide what are the pieces you want to use to put together your identity.
Mhm.
Back to the
Yeah,
puzzle
definitely.
analogy.
Mhm.
You get to decide if you need all those pieces to your puzzle,
Mhm.
if they're going to be a
Yeah.
part of it. That's a great way of thinking about it going forward.
Yeah.
Because in my situation, my mom never told me the answers. I never got the answers from her. I had to
Mhm.
find them out on my own, and I decided to do that. And I'm glad that I did. But
Mhm.
if I didn't or I couldn't, because we have a lot of tools now to get information like that with the
Mhm.
ancestry.com and things like this. And that was what I used. What I use now over the past 3 years, found more relatives using
Mhm.
ancestry.com. And so I don't know about the idea of not knowing. Like, there are definitely things I don't know, and I'm okay with
Mhm.
that as well. I'm okay with not knowing because I don't need, now that I'm a grown up, and I think when you get to a certain age where you're able to deal with those emotions, you feel more confident not having the story defined. Whereas when you're little, you want to make up these stories because you feel like you need a story, you need an explanation.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
then when you get older, you're much more comfortable in your own skin,
Yeah,
it's really
definitely.
touching, the story you told about making up the story about your dad being a firefighter fighting in America and
Mhm.
fighting the fires in America. He was a hero. And then
Mhm.
your mom said, "No, that's not true." And then I can feel for you in that situation, how that must have felt
Mhm.
with the other kids.
Yeah, I think that in my head, there was this period of time I kept picturing my dad as a hero
Mm.
to make myself not feel bad that he's not there for me. These parts became more how I pictured him as the positive side, or sometimes I don't even want to know something bad that about him, because my mom did mention to me when I grow up that some things related to financially, my dad's company wasn't doing great. And so she had to suffer a lot. That was during the time when I was in Shanghai. So I didn't know or being suffered together with that. I pictured my mom as the villain side of making up the stories of destroying the hero image in my head about my dad. And so that had become something, it kind of toxin the relationship between my mom and I myself. Before I start this healing work, I would see all as myself as victim. But then when I start to dig into it, and sometimes I realize, oh no, I'm actually being the villain me in there as well. That was also something really interesting to how we reform our past and see from different angles.
Yeah, because you could reframe your mom's behavior as that she was actually setting things up for you to
Mm-hmm.
feel better when you came back to live with her, that there were obviously some things going on, and that's why
Yeah.
you were living with your grandparents, and then
Mm-hmm.
she was making it nice for you to come back so that you could be together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about school and when you were a teenager? How did you do in school? What kind of a student were you?
I was always the good kid when inside primary school. When I was first, my mom originally wanted to homeschool me As I mentioned, my mom really loves traveling. So that was
Mm,
something she felt if I'm being homeschooled, then we can do it together. And it was before Hong Kong had the law to state that we cannot do homeschool anymore. Every kid needs to go to primary school, secondary school. Then I went through the whole kindergarten period with homeschooling. I still goes to nursery and kindergarten sometimes to socialize with people, but I didn't have the whole structure about how school should be. When I first entered primary school, I was really nervous of seeing people needing to wear uniform and we needed to follow a timetable. That wasn't something I was really developed at that time. I told myself that I just need to follow what other people tell me to do. I was really a good kid at school, and I did need to move school to school because we were moving from inside Hong Kong from one place to another. But I was all the time this quiet girl at school until I went to secondary school. I felt I should be more me. I should be starting to ask questions and not just obeying everything.
mhm.
In my high school, when the first few years, it was really tough of being labeled from a good kid to a bad kid because I was keep failing subjects. So my primary school, I was in a general community school. It was just next to my home, so the closest school that I can go to on foot. But then in secondary school, Hong Kong has these labeling between schools, which are the top schools, and then we have branding for banding for the school. We have like band one as very good schools and two and three. So went from a community school to a top school in Hong Kong, which most of my classmates were from some very, maybe they were from a private primary school or English primary school level. With my level was not comparable. I was like in this shock for a very long time of why my result became so bad. In primary school, I even not study too much. I can still get a good grade, but it doesn't work that way in my secondary school. And so when I went to secondary school, then I kept needing to see social worker because of my grade. I started to feel really low self-esteem and became not confident in my academic ways. At the same time, I didn't really have some skills that I felt really performing in my other activities as well. I decided that, okay, I just going to be rebellion so I can get people's attention.
Mm.
So that period of time, I think I was I was trying to be not nice to people.
Oh, okay. So what
And
kind of things did you do that were rebellious?
I would be really loud person at school.
Really?
I would try to, it really doesn't suit me.
No, you're
Like
not
when
loud.
people look at me and they would not picture me as that person. And now when I see back on my teenager time, I couldn't picture myself as that girl anymore. I'll be screaming if people not listening to me, or if someone say something by a mistake, I'll just keep picking up their mistake and keep laughing at them because I
Mm,
thought, okay, that I was cool. I was just getting attention from people. But it became really toxic for me to make friends as well because I didn't even realize my behaviors were affecting my social life. And at the same time, I didn't want to be that person, but I didn't know how to change that perspective as
mm.
well.
Would
So
you call yourself a bully? Were you a bully at that time?
I think it was it was together. I was being a bully, and at the same time I was being bullied,
Okay.
or they kind of connected together. still, I couldn't say like a clear cut in there whether it was because I was a bully, so I was being bullied, or it was because I was being bullied, so I started
You
to
started to be a
bully
bully.
others.
Do you
So
have a
like
story about that? Something that happened at that time that you could talk about?
I remembered there was once that it was a dancing competition between our class and the class. um, I forgot if we were in the same grade or they were one grade senior than us, and we were like the final teams to enter the competition. And we were wearing some special costumes that we decide ourselves. I remember there was this girl from the other team. She kept laughing our costume, and especially laughing at one of my friends. And that time for me, I guess other teenagers, friendship was something super important. And I couldn't take her laugh towards my friend. I went straight to her. I forgot whether I grabbed her hair or I snapped her. I was just saying to her, you couldn't be that bad towards my friend. It's a little bit like I want to stand up for her,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
at the same time, I didn't realize the actions I was doing is also causing another person's pain as well. Those are a lot of parts in my teenagers time. Like I see friendship as something super important, but at the time, I also felt I was really bad in managing friendship. I have that old control that I want to be in control of the friendship because I was really sensitive as well. So anything that happened to a friendship can affect me emotionally a lot. Then I would be spending extra time to maintain a friendship and not studying or not doing other things. Those creates a lot of conflicts for me and my mom as well because
Mm.
she couldn't understand why. I remember a deep story that happened on Mother's Day because one of our friends, she really took care of us. She always made great. So her mom always made this great lunchbox and shared with us. So we call that friend as our mother. And I remember on one of the Mother's Day, and I was making a card for my friend who I called as a mother. And I wasn't making it for my own mom. And my mom saw it and started crying.
Oh.
And I couldn't understand her at that time. But when I now grow up, then oh yeah, that's interesting. And that actually make me tears up when I think of how much I visual myself as a victim, but at the same time I was being the one hurting her as well.
Yeah. That's a very deep realization to come to. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that your actions that you're using to protect yourself or those could actually be hurting someone else.
And it's interesting when we start talking about our stories, then those parts comes out. And
Mhm.
normally we didn't really think about those things.
Did you ever talk to your mom about that?
We did in a joke way. So she was just bringing up this part. Do you remember when you were a teen? That was something you did. But that was just in a joke way that, well, now every year we did send you a Mother's Day card and stuff. So it was interesting.
Mhm. But that had to happen so that you could have a sensitivity towards your mom and the importance of what that
Hmm.
meant to her. And also so that she could have a sensitivity to you and maybe what she could do to help your relationship so that you would feel thinking of her first as your mom rather than your friend's
Hmm.
mom.
Yeah. I think that
Sometimes
was
those things,
also.
yeah, no, sometimes those things have to happen so that we can learn that
Mhm.
and then it improves the relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember also at that period of time, it was also that my mom was being really strict on me, which I didn't hear as well. I remember the time when I was sending her a Mother's Day card and I decorated it very nicely. I was always being very artsy when I was a kid. And I remember she was picking up the wrong words that I wrote. Maybe so in Chinese writing, we have those strokes, and she was taking me, oh, this you shouldn't write it in that way. Instead of telling me how much she appreciates the card I made her or how beautiful it is. So throughout those disappointments as well as a kid, that time when I was a teenager, I didn't really want to send her something because I felt that it would be out of pressure in feeling that gratefulness.
Mm-hmm.
So those stories are actually also connecting with each other. So it's interesting.
They are. It is really
Mm,
interesting. So you were always an artistic person, even as a child.
yeah. So my grandma, she didn't really make art for her living, but she would be helping her friends to do some art pieces that in the past the Chinese they would do with the plastics and make them into flowers,
Oh.
and they would be selling those flowers. So when I was a kid that time, I grew up by observing how she did those things as well. And she would always sew the clothes for us. That was something as when I grew up, memory of something we did together. I
Mhm.
had always been interested in art as well. And in my primary school, I was also really interested in colors and how can I use all these different elements in presenting rather than using words. Because I
Mm.
always felt verbal communication was something I wasn't confident with. So I would
Mhm.
try to use some other ways in communicating with others. I love making gifts for others. That was a fun part for what I do. And so I really enjoy that.
Yeah. Art plays a big role in my life as well. I had a grandmother who was very artistic and my mother was very artistic and I continue to be artistic. And it's a way of expressing yourself. I always feel for people who don't have an artistic sensibility or they don't have that as something to fall back on, because that
Mhm.
really does help you. If I'm sitting and wanting to contemplate, I might pick up some knitting or I might do a project. I was making some t-shirts this week as a project and I've been painting, doing little watercolor work. And actually, I've been thinking of you when I'm doing the watercolors. I'll have to show
Oh,
you what I've been working on. But
yeah.
I mean, because you have that to fall back on. And I know that you do that now. You teach people now how to use the arts to
Mhm.
heal and how to have that as an outlet. It's like an outlet for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you feel
Yeah.
when you were a teenager, were you using your art as an outlet or you were still doing that at that time, even though it was kind of an angsty period?
I think that made me think about the educational system in Hong Kong as well. The whole way we were being taught when we were in primary school was kind of even for art, for sports, or for music. They all have a right way of doing that. If you play
Mhm.
piano, you should be playing it from the key notes that you saw on the book. Or if you draw, then you should be looking at where to shade, which is the proper color to use. And so that part, it was kind of very contradicting to how I view creativity. I remember I was learning piano since I was a kid because I was really interested in music and all these beautiful songs, or just the key itself. It sounds really nice for me until I got a teacher and then I started needing to do the examinations for piano so I can get the certification. So that helps my application for secondary school. It kind of became pressure for me,
Mm.
and I stopped enjoying doing that. I quit piano as soon as I went into secondary school,
Oh.
and I stopped drawing just for fun anymore. Just when I was drawing in primary school, then I still can decide what do I draw and stuff. But in secondary school, it's all about if you draw, then if you have this vision of becoming an artist, then you have to learn in a proper way. You have to
Mm.
learn how to use oil paint, how to use water paint, and those materials shouldn't be mixed together in secondary school because of all these strict rules following, and they will vision you that, oh, if you draw, then you want to be an artist. So you have to learn the history about art, and then you have to learn how to use each of the materials properly. But I was just having this vision of, oh, I want to do art for fun and
Mm.
not thinking I need to be a Picasso artist or someone to be able to make art. So that I think also related to why in secondary school I felt a bit lost at the
Mm.
beginning because I couldn't find something I enjoy doing. It seems the things I used to enjoy doing, I couldn't do them anymore because I'm not advanced enough for that. So that became when I started working as an art therapist. This is a big mindset. I want to tell people about there's no right or wrong in creativity or how should you draw. Because whenever I work with adults, a very common thing I hear is, oh, I can't draw. But actually, we can all be creative. We can all draw. It just, we have this mindset of how is a good painting, how is something that is ugly, or, oh, I shouldn't share this with others.
Yeah. When you went into high school, started to bump up against all of these rules and walls,
Hmm.
and your ability to create freely in your own way was stifled. And that then
Hmm.
coincided with you acting out a little bit. You were trying to
Hmm.
figure out, again, the idea of identity. You're trying to figure it out. You didn't have that freedom of creative expression anymore. It was much more
Hmm.
rigid.
Yeah.
So that really
Yeah.
affected you. And then
Hmm.
after high school, where did you go? What happened then?
When we finish high school in Hong Kong, we have one exam is called DSE. Based on that grade, you will determine which university you are able to go to. Because Hong Kong, we only have around a 18% rate of kids are able to go to university, as we only have 9 universities. And so that competition was really, really competitive that time. And I was lucky enough to be on the last train to be able to get into university. And so then when I studied in uni, I decided to study social work. One thought is I wanted to help people, as I always picture myself as really empathetic, and I really want to know more about people's stories. Another reasons why I choose social work was also because in my secondary school, I had a lot of times of meeting social worker based on my grade,
Mm.
based on my relationship with my parents. One story about one experience I had with the social worker at school really kind of interestingly decided my future path. It was that time I felt no one I could trust. So I decided that I would go and see the social worker and I would talk with her because I was in a very dark period of my time. I couldn't see any hope. I really wanted to end my life. And so I told her about that because I felt the need of speaking to an adult with that. But I didn't want her to inform anyone because other people I don't really trust. And the moment I walked out from the room, when I get back home, the first thing my mom asked was, why did you tell the social worker that you want to kill yourself? And so I knew that, oh, she told my mom. And the next day when I go to my class and my class teacher asked me, are you feeling all right? Why you want to kill yourself? I was like, okay. So the social worker didn't just tell my mom, she told my class teacher as well, since she told everyone. So that broke my trust with adults, create that angry thought of me that I want to change the system. I'm going to be a social worker. I'm going to be a good one. And I'm going to not do the same thing as her. But when I start studying, I kind of understand why she was doing that. Because when it comes to life and death, you really need to tell the parents and inform people as to protect the kids. So it was really interesting that because of that incident, create this thought for me to wanting to be a social worker, and the whole path of becoming a social worker made me understood her behavior. And we actually became friends after that. And I seen her as a senior of me, and I would ask her suggestions when I was in my placement. And that 4 years of my social work study helped to develop me a lot in my personal life as well.
Yes, I can relate to that. I have my master's degree in psychology, and I learned a lot about myself in the process. In fact, that was when I learned about the idea that my mom couldn't talk about her parents and how they had died. I remember my professor said to me, "Oh, you don't know anything about your grandparents? You don't know how they died?" And I was, "No." And he said, "Oh, well, that's a problem. There's something going on there. There's something." And I was,
Mm.
"What?" I I thought my family was perfect, and I didn't realize this was
Mhm.
such a big issue. But these little things that as you're growing up with them, they add up,
Mhm.
and they are significant, and we don't even realize the ways that they're significant until we get older and we start digging into it. So there's a lot of value in the analysis that goes on, especially when you're
Mhm.
receiving education around psychological
Mhm.
fields, social work, and
Mhm.
it's very valuable. But then what do you do with that information once you get it? How do you transform that, having the information, understanding it, and then transform somehow so that you can overcome these things? What do you think about that?
You mean with the learnings that we did in psychological field
Yeah,
and transforming our own experience?
right.
I think that I always have this thought that most people who interested in studying psychology or this field has to do with something related to our own childhood or the way of development. I see we all as wanting to get to know ourselves better, interest in our own personal development. So when it comes to the studies and to know about all these theories and be able to connect them back with, oh, it's in that part we that part I learned today, it can trace back to my own past. I won't say I did it immediately when I was studying that when during my 1820s, but now when I develop myself in this career more and more, then I can see more and more connections and more acceptance to my own past as well.
So
Able to like,
acceptance is a big part of it. Acceptance,
yeah.
and then realizing that you are someone different now.
Mm-hmm.
You're a completely different person than the person you
Mm-hmm.
were with the issues that happen. But I love what you
Mm-hmm.
say about people who study psychology are just really open to exploring their own lives and often have trauma that they want to work through.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think that's
definitely.
true. And we don't have to think of trauma as, I always differentiate between capital T trauma and small t trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't need to compare traumas with other people. Sometimes I'll think, well, there were definitely traumas in my childhood, but nothing really bad. Some people have
Mm-hmm.
very, very stark and dark traumas in their lives.
Yeah.
I don't have
Mm-hmm.
that, but yet that doesn't make your trauma any less valuable if it's a small t trauma, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing about the time that you were in that place where you thought you might want to end your life. How do you think you got out of that? What prevented you from acting on that when you were a teenager?
I actually don't have a very clear answers on a special moment that I was just awake and
Mm.
decide not to. But I think it was the fact that I talked with others that made me think of, am I really ready to do that?
Mhm.
And is this the only way of dealing with my life? And am my life really that bad that I need to make that decision? And I won't say that thought, it was just one moment it disappeared. But that time, I think I was in this bottom of my life, and I know that I couldn't go more down anymore.
Mhm.
And it was interesting that because of that, I found my passion in studying again. So
Mm.
I had nothing to do. I didn't find any interest in doing anything. So let's see if I study without pressure of, oh, I needing to get how much better, how would it be? And so I remember that summer I was just reading books, studying normal, but I trying to see in a fun way. Instead of, oh, I need to recite these, I try to go online and find the backstory of what happened in that time, because a lot are related to history. I will find videos that I would be interested in watching, because I realized that it was the education way, it didn't suit me. So I'm a more visual and listener. So I have to learn through videos that has the visual picture for me
Mhm.
and at the same time has sounds. That was something at school they didn't really provide for us.
Mm.
So that's why studying was something really boring for me. So throughout my own self education and at school, I would just be the same. If the teacher telling something I'm not interested in, I would just do my own things and stuff. I didn't really care that much after I speaking with others or after I realized I was in my bottom. And that became the moment for me to jump back up,
Yeah.
that I was just being myself and trying my own ways. And eventually I got much better. And the teachers at my secondary school, they always has been telling others as well that this secondary school life was just riding on a roller coaster.
Oh,
And
yeah.
one moment that I was the lowest and everyone didn't have any expectation on me anymore, I became to the top. So I remember I was 192 out of 198 students. And then the next examination, I became the sixth of the whole year. And so everyone was really
Mm.
shocked. So what happened? I couldn't tell what happened, but I was just using my own ways to helping
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And
And discovering what
yeah.
worked for you. You were able to
Mm-hmm.
discover that. And it is hard to put a finger on that, how you actually get to that point. But it's very
Mm-hmm.
common. I mean, so many people I talked to had the same thing, and it always in that high school period of time, it's something
Mm-hmm.
about that point in development that can put you in a really low place. But that is also something I hear a lot, that also propels you to find your passion or to find something, that you're
Mm-hmm.
interested in. And that I've seen that happen a lot with people. So I'm glad that you got out of that period and found something really important to you. So you went to college,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you got your degree in social work. So I'm really curious about when you met your husband. How did that happen?
The meeting of us came back to why I would be in Edinburgh at that time.
Okay.
So after my social work study, I didn't feel I was ready to go to work. And at the same time, I didn't feel social worker was a right way for me to go into because the amount of caseload that every social worker will have was not able for us to really care about a,
Mm,
a client. And I didn't want myself to get into that situation. So I decided to study art therapy right after my uni and go more in depth into therapy work, counseling. I went to Edinburgh, and then in my study, I decided to do a part-time job as well. So I was working in a Chinese restaurant, and that was where I met my husband. He was a student and also working there. We met, and it was a very fast moving that we met, and then today we decided to be together. The next week we moved in together, and after that half year we decided to get married together. So it
wow.
was all a very dramatic year that my friends or my family were all in a shock. So that time I was 22 and he was 19. So also it
Oh,
was a young age
yeah.
to decide to get married. So it was
Yes.
really interesting.
So you got married when you were 22 and your husband was 19.
Yes.
And how old are you now?
I'm now becoming 28. So
Okay.
this year we are together for 5 years.
5
Five? Yeah.
years. Wow. So your husband, he's from Poland, is that right?
Yeah, he is
Okay.
Polish, but he was grow up in Edinburgh until we
Oh,
decide to move back to Poland
okay.
before the pandemic.
So now you're living in Poland with your husband
Mhm.
and you have some
Yes.
exciting news to share. Do you want to tell everybody?
Yeah, sure. So we are expecting a multicultural baby
Expecting a
born
little
in this
baby.
November.
I'm so excited about that. Wow.
Yeah,
You're going to be such a great mom.
thank you. I hope so.
So I love hearing about the journey that brought you to where you are today. And I want to talk a little bit about your work and the importance of
Mhm,
that. I really am struck by all the connections with the nonverbal and alternative ways of communicating. And
mhm.
I want you to talk a little bit about why that works so well for people. Does it take a
Yeah,
pressure
definitely.
off in some way? Just talk a little bit about why that works for people using these nonverbal healing methods.
I think it comes to a lot of different reasons. What you say that the nonverbal way first, it could be easier to create a safe space for a person to be able to share rather than you verbally you go to a therapist and the moment you sit down it feels a ticking clock that you need to
Mm,
start speaking something. If not, then I'm wasting time, wasting money here. So I have to dig into my head, which it wasn't formed by words when we were a kid, and to start talking about it, which it could be something really hard to do, especially comes to someone who has a messy childhood or to have some trauma that they haven't processed because our brain was kind of like trying to protect us not to process those parts. And only by verbally dig it out, it might not work or it might be really tough. It becomes a second time to traumatize a person
mm,
by just digging into it. And so a nonverbal way, it creates more space for a person to be in a room, not just with the therapist, but also you have the art materials or you have your own space to explore and especially comes to something you are not certain with as well. And so that give you the time, the space that you are able to do something to get to know yourself better as well. Second, when we were a child, the first thing we got in touch with wasn't really words. The first day we bond, we were connect with all these sense, and we're expressing ourselves without words as well. Babies can tell you that they're hungry by just different ways of crying to
Mhm.
let you know what kind of emotion they are in. And these are some things are being suppressed when we grow up. We don't care about post nonverbal communication that much if that person is speaking, or we would stop allowing ourselves to do some of the things, dancing on the street, or we
Right.
won't want to be embarrassed by some of the things that we do. Even on the paper I draw, oh, I don't want to draw these out, even it's in my mind, if my friend is going to like laugh at it in an art class. And so letting our nervous system to also be comfortable of sharing something we might be embarrassed or might be contains a lot of emotions inside, to be able to allow ourselves to share that.
It feels to me if you can allow yourself to get into it without judging yourself, that it will
Mm-hmm.
help you to release that idea we have, that tendency we have of self-criticism. Maybe that
Mm-hmm.
transfers then into other areas of your life, other relationships, other times when you can be more expressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in our pattern, you also see the pattern of how we deal with things in life as well. Some people, they come in the room, they are really afraid to make the room messy or apologize when they spill water on the table. And those are also some very common behaviors we can see in work situation, or like what is actually going behind that person's their days, and see their whole routine as well.
Yeah, to allow yourself to be unrestricted, to be
Mm-hmm.
uninhibited is what you're really teaching. And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what you had to learn as a teenager. Because you're right, we know it innately when we're children. We know this. We do it. We just express. If we're,
Mm-hmm.
if we're sad, we pound our feet on the ground and we express
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. If we're hungry, we cry, when we're little, or we fuss, to get what we want.
Mm-hmm.
If we're happy, we run outside and we jump in a rain puddle. We don't do
Yeah.
those things when we grow up. We stop ourselves from expressing ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually you illustrated beautifully how that's learned, because when you're in school, they start with different rules, different ways of doing. You have to do it this way. These are the parameters for this. This is the way we do this. And everything
Mm-hmm.
becomes very regimented. And then you become suppressed. We learn to suppress ourselves. And then
Yeah.
for you, when you were in high school, you gradually, through a very difficult process of that roller coaster, but you did get to understand that you needed to find ways that worked for you. And
Mm-hmm.
I think most of us do eventually learn that, but we still, when we grow up, we do suppress ourselves so much. We're afraid of other people's judgment. We're afraid that what we say isn't going to be received well, or that people aren't going to understand us. And so we just
Mm-hmm.
don't, we just go into a shell.
Yeah.
So art therapy is something that can help people to express freely. And so
Mm-hmm.
what kinds of things typically do you see come out in art therapy? What happens? Walk us through a session.
So for our therapy session is really different than other kind of therapy, which might be more therapist directive. But in an art therapy session, it's more the client is directing. For example, if you want to start with art making and then we can talk, or you want to make art and talk at the same time, or you prefer talk and then make art as your final work, it really gives the client a lot of variety and control over a period of time that that should be for them. And so in a session, there are a lot of things can come up, whether it's towards someone's childhood, or there is a symbol that for this
Mm.
person can be different than others. there was one client who came to me, and in all her sessions, I think before she started really opening up, we had around 4 or 5 sessions together. And in every session, she would only draw circles. And she didn't talk, and she just draw circle until one day she was feeling comfortable enough to share with me about her artwork. And that circle actually representing her vagina, which it brought back a piece of memory of she was being raped when she was a kid. That part of memory, it kind of was covered in her brain. She didn't want to bring it up. She had never talked about it with others. And I felt that was the beautiful part of how art therapy can work, to give people the time and allowing them to go back into their memories when they feel comfortable to share. Because even if they don't share with me in this art process, also they are bringing up memories for themselves as well, which
Mhm.
that was key healing as well. That is going back into their inner selves. And so I think that was something, if in common, is that it can bring a lot of memories that we won't feel comfortable to share with people in the first sight.
That's a powerful story. I am struck by the idea that it took so much time and that people should
Mm-hmm.
understand that it is not a quick fix.
Yeah,
And you should
definitely.
allow yourself the space and the time for healing to take
Mm-hmm.
place.
We see in a therapy session, some clients, they go to a therapist, maybe 2, 3 sessions, and they made the conclusion that, oh, therapy doesn't work for me because I didn't see any change in these 2, 3 hours. But it's not that quick sometimes when it comes to healing something that is so deep inside us.
Yeah. In this
Mhm.
case, she had to access the memory first. And sometimes that's how deep it is. And just being able to call up the memory without the pain is really
Mhm.
part of the goal, to be able to call up the memory and then to be able to share it with someone else, to be able to reframe it, to be able to make it a part of your identity without having those feelings, the emotions
Mhm.
of pain
Yeah.
come up is the
Mhm.
goal. And that takes a long time.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it took you a whole lifetime to repress it. It took you a long time to
Mhm.
keep it buried. It's been buried. If you buried something in the earth really, really deep, it would take a long time for you to dig it back up. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
I want to know how you use yoga also. How does the
Mhm.
body and the movements of the body also play into that healing
Mhm.
process?
So in the first few years when I graduate and I entered the practice, I was just using art therapy, but I was always feeling there is something missing in the practice. And during the pandemic time, then as same as others, I have all the time in the world to do my own work. And I start to realize for myself, the part I have been suppressing was how comfortable I am with my body. That bring me back to think about the elements that are very important for me to use my body in expressing. I used to dance when I was a kid.
Mm.
And so dance and also yoga that I started practice when I was 18, 19 years old. They were really important for me. So I decided, okay, it's hard to do dancing on dance therapy or something because I wanted to do something that is a certification that I can use for the practice. It's hard to do that when I was being locked at home, and so I decided to go with the online yoga instructor training. And after that, I start adding yoga into the practice and into an element of my own healing as well. I feel the difference in how much when I'm comfortable with my body and allowing myself to not focusing on, oh, how good I'm doing this pose, but just
Mm,
letting myself to sink in the environment, having the time for myself, and how much that comfortable feeling comes to my body helps with my expression when it comes to art, storytelling, or different kind of tools as well. That part was just because I accepting how my body to be, and I start to realize that can change people's judgment on themselves as well, which it comes when you are adding these two elements together, it seems they're totally different. But at the same time, when thinking of yoga, it's also a very creative element. We were doing a lot of poses that are things that animals would do. And when we doing it, we were actually like creating an image inside our head. Oh, so sometimes when I'm doing downward dog and I see my dog is doing next to me, and I will be loving how they look. And that part is also a creative journey for us as well. Of when we are in a mountain pose and how we can imagine ourselves, our body becomes a mountain, and
mm,
to be that strong to hold us there. I think yoga is such a big thing that has so many elements inside, so many focus we can do. That part of like accepting ourselves and embracing our creativity is something I will be focusing with my clients in getting themselves comfortable in sharing or getting their nervous system to be ready to share.
yeah, yoga is very healing, and I think it's a great tool for visualization as well. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that you grew up in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong, as we know, was a democracy, and
Mhm.
now it has changed. There have been some changes. So
Yeah.
you're not living there anymore. You live in Poland now, but are you still a citizen of Hong Kong?
Yes, so I'm still citizen in Hong Kong, and I have been participating a lot of activities from here or from Edinburgh to support Hong Kong as well. It was really painful to see how this year's things have been changed, and I would be hearing from some of my friends, or a lot of my friends decided to move away from Hong Kong as well, which was the home for most of us, at least in our heart. It's
Mm,
always the home for us. It affects a lot of people, their lives, of their families as well.
yeah. So what kind of changes have taken place over the past few years?
I cannot say from my personal experience, as I'm not in there during the time when it happened the most. From a perspective of someone who has been through I would say the old Hong Kong,
Hmm.
I would say that one main difference I can see. First thing is a lot of people has been moved to other countries, and second thing I would see is the freedom of speech for people being taken away, which is such a core value for how a person being developed, how we are being educated, how everything inside us were formed. And we couldn't see that in nowadays kids. They were able to form that part, or at least for now. And also the fear inside people. Sometimes I do also have the fear, oh, if one day I would need to go back to Hong Kong, I want to visit home because I haven't been home for 6 years now. And would I need to be worried about my own safety, which I hadn't been worrying that when I was in there that time.
Yeah. Would you be able to leave if you went back? Is there a restriction of movement there?
I don't think so,
Okay. People
but
can come and
uh,
go from the country?
yeah, people can come and go from the country, but it also is this uncertainty inside
Hmm.
your head can create a fear as well. You
Right.
don't know if like, oh, I will be speaking something wrong that got me in
Right.
trouble, or some of the actions I shouldn't really be doing it, or you need to watch what you wear, or something that
Mm,
we had never experienced that much of restriction before.
they have now. So
Yeah.
it changed from a democracy to now it's under the Chinese communist system fully.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that it's moving towards that way.
Okay. Do you have any relatives
Mhm.
that live there?
Right now, only my mom is still living in Hong Kong. But I would say that especially for maybe 20s, 30s, this generation, a lot of impact on us is also the impact for your relationship with family as well. Because in our generation, there are so many families were formed by Chinese and Hong Kong family, in my case as well. And so for the Chinese part of my family, they really couldn't understand some of the situations that we were talking about in Hong Kong during it was happening, or they couldn't understand why I would be active in supporting Hong Kong people when I'm not in Hong Kong anymore. So these political matters are something that I couldn't really speak with my family or keep getting denial on. And so those, I guess, is in our generation, a lot of my friends or like a lot of people I know, they experience the same thing as well. It affects a lot on the communication between the people who from two different angles seeing what is happening.
So the
Mhm.
biggest impact you see is on the freedom of speech and the communication, that kind of.
Yeah.
Have you been back to visit China?
No, I haven't been back to visit China, I think 8 years now. So the year before I moved to Edinburgh, I visited. And then after that, since then, I haven't been visiting Hong Kong or China.
Do you miss anything about those cultures when you in the way you grew up?
It's interesting that since the pregnancy, it brought me back to a lot of my childhood. We keep missing the childhood food. When I'm talking with my husband, of, oh, which language would our kids be raised in? And so it definitely brought me back a lot with the cultural, with how I was growing up and how I see education and all this interesting insight has been brought out. And I won't say I not miss home, but since a lot of my friends were moving away, and nowadays it's so easy for you to get things from your home country
Mhm.
in your current place. So that definitely helped a lot. And
Mm.
you can always connect with people online nowadays, but still, do I want to visit Hong Kong? Because my husband has never been to Hong Kong.
Ah.
So definitely I would want to show him around. And
Mhm.
next time we go back, probably with the baby as well. So I definitely
Aw.
would want the baby to see, oh, this is how your mom being raised. This is the place and stuff.
Mhm. Will you speak any other languages, do you think you in the home?
Yeah, so right now we are thinking of a trilingual environment. I will be speaking Cantonese, my husband will be speaking Polish, and when we are together, we will be speaking in English.
English.
And so we'll see how it goes.
So you're setting up the nonverbal communication already, huh?
Yeah, so currently we are just trying to speak to our dogs with all these three languages.
Oh, you're
Not
practicing
to
on your
like make
dog?
them.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, so cute. Aw. All right. Well, I want to ask you the final questions of the day because it's the Blessings podcast. We have to find out what are the biggest lessons and blessings of your life. So, what would you say are, let's start out with the blessings. What would you say are the
Mhm.
biggest blessings, the things you're the most grateful for?
I think the biggest blessing is I have been given a lot of freedom to make mistakes and to find my way. There is no right or wrong in when we should be doing what in our life. And I feel blessed to be able to make the decision in not restricting myself to think. when is the right time or wrong time to do things.
That's beautiful. And what about your lessons? What do you think are the biggest lessons from your life?
I think in our conversation, one thing that stand out for me was that there is no one parent they raised you or they born you to want the bad things for you.
Mm,
Maybe they are bad in communicating. Maybe they didn't know how to be a good parent themselves. But when we look back of our past, there is always moments we can find that they were doing those things because they love us so much.
yeah, they're always doing the best that they can,
Mhm.
parents, that the best that they
Yeah.
can in any given moment.
Mm.
Do you think that people are ever healed? Are we ever really healed?
I think for seeing all the perspective, everything fully healed, maybe it's hard, but also maybe we don't need to. Healing moments of every healing journey is a
Mm,
path that we go through. We definitely learn something from it. And this journey is not there to torture you or to bring back all the traumas, but it's a way for us to grow.
yeah, I feel that. All right, final question. First thing that pops into your head, what's the most important thing?
Family.
Family.
I think it's also related to what I'm going through now as well.
Yeah,
When
you're in the
forming a
season. You're in the season of
yeah,
becoming a mom.
definitely that is something that is in my top priority now.
Well, I think you're going to be an amazing mom, and I am
Oh,
so
thank
excited to
you.
see when this beautiful little person is born. And thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing so much of your heart with me today and telling me
Thank
all
you for
these wonderful
having me.
stories. Thank
Thank
you, C.
you.